Welcome back to The Contrarian, everybody. Today I'll be talking about a topic that I have talked about before. About a month or two ago, I made a video, and then about 4 months ago, I also made another video talking about the incentive that the Federal Reserve had to consolidate the banking system prior to their rollout of their FedNow CBDC program, which, by the way, they're saying will happen sometime this summer. So that's just a few months away at this point. So it does make sense now to start seeing more bank failures, regional banks being consolidated into big banks, and that continuing. I really did not think that it would stop with Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, everything that happened back in early March, late February. It really did seem like it would continue, just especially looking at the degree to which the Fed had tightened on an extremely leveraged banking system. You cannot raise rates that quickly and dramatically and do quantitative tightening without something breaking. And it appears that a lot of stuff is now breaking in the form of regional banks and local banks, and they are being allowed to fail or be consolidated into big banks. So the big banks come in, buy them out, bail them out essentially, but it does make it to where just the whole localized sort of banking system that did exist is now being more consolidated. And there will be some local regional banks that survive this, but it could be kind of a more consolidation type of event as what happened back in 2008. So looking at this really interesting chart, it shows just the size of all of the bank failures that have happened in the last, say, 21 years. And it's really telling because you can see just the magnitude of these three banks that have failed in the last couple of months. These would all be number two if they were back in the 2008 time period, and they would all be behind the Washington Mutual Bank that failed back in 2008. And of course you can see all this, little banks that failed along with them back in 2008, but it's very telling to see just the magnitude of the banking crisis as compared with back then. Now, this isn't taking into account the degree with which the M2 money supply has grown since then, so it might be a little bit out of proportion because of that, but it is very telling nevertheless to see how big these banks are relative to banks that have failed in the past. And the Federal Reserve continues to insist that the banking system is sound and resilient, even just 2 hours earlier than the largest California bank basically going insolvent and being bought out by a big bank. Powell was saying the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient, so it does show how out of touch with reality Powell and the Fed might be. It might just be that they are that out of touch with reality that this whole situation is happening. During 2021, of course, we saw them insist that inflation would be transitory, that it would go away on its own. Of course, this did not happen because inflation was not being caused by what the Fed was really doing. Well, it was in a way, but it was more so supply chains coupled with the Fed pumping the system full of money. And by definition, there you have a lot of money chasing fewer goods and services, particularly with regards to energy, and energy being an input into everything. Of course, that made basically everything go through inflation. And so the Fed was proven wrong in 2021. They had to aggressively tighten last year, and in order to bring inflation down, or try to, they effectively are trying to just cause a recession in order to do this. And they really cannot address the underlying issue of supply chains and energy. They need to simply address demand, and they do that by raising rates, making money harder to get, and then businesses slow down, overall economic activity slows down. But it is really telling to see how just maybe out of touch with reality they are. But it is really interesting to look at a statement Powell made just yesterday now. He said, in determining the extent to which additional policy firming may be appropriate to return inflation to 2% over time, the committee will take into account the cumulative tightening of monetary policy, the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity, and inflation and economic and financial development. So they will be factoring into account all of the bank failures, as he's saying, but he's also saying that they will be trying to look into the leads and lags that their monetary policies have. And here is where I think they are out of touch with reality, in the fact that looking in the rearview mirror like they do at employment, at inflation, these are all lagging indicators. So if they really wanted to be up to speed on where the economy really is, they could be looking at something like mortgage applications being at extreme lows right now, inventories being bloated, so consumer spending really dropping, falling off a cliff. They could be looking at indicators like these that are already showing dramatic economic slowdowns, or even employment in the South and kind of Midwest also not going well right now. So it does begin to seem like there are economic indicators showing a recession on the horizon, a dramatic economic slowdown, of course, caused by their aggressive tightening. But the Fed, being as a kind of looking in the rearview mirror as much as they are, they probably will not see these leads and lags because they're looking at more lagging indicators. So it is really telling. We will have to see how this continues to play out. But regional bank stocks are all down dramatically in the last few days, anywhere from 30 to 70%. Pac West, Western Alliance Bank, Metropolitan Bank, all of these stocks are down dramatically. It does make sense because if this trend continues, as investors are maybe starting to realize, local regional banks could be in trouble. They could undergo consolidation where stockholders, equity holders don't really receive any sort of a bailout, but it's just sort of conglomerated into a JP Morgan or Wells Fargo. And all of this does continue along the trend of just consolidating the banking system, which I've mentioned before, into a more centralized type of system where you maybe have a handful of large banks that control majority of the banking system, through which you can easily roll out a CBDC, which the Fed has stated they will do. So, last year, fall of last year, they did do a trial run of sorts of their FedNow program with, you guessed it, all of these large financial institutions. So, it's not like this is hard to see, but it's also not like this is the end of the world, as some might be saying. It will dramatically reduce financial freedoms that people largely enjoyed. And it will probably be a slow-ish process in terms of eroding those. So it could be the case of where there's little incentives along the way offered if you join into the FedNow program. Maybe you get a free iPhone, a free $500 of FedNow bucks or whatever they're called. There could be things like that get people to get roped in, and it would not be hard to get the average American to join in with little incentives like these. But over time, it would be the case of where your money is now being tracked, every transaction is being tracked. You might have incentives not to drive over 30, 40 miles a day. They might ping you, penalize you if you are buying meat or whatever it is that they're demonizing lately. If you post a meme that's offensive or whatever, they could remove money from your account or whatever. So it does just very much so bring in the whole CBDC kind of escalation of authoritarianism that everyone has talked about, which is definitely not an encouraging trend. But it does appear that is kind of cooked in the books at this point. There are some states, Florida I know did push legislation to try to ban a CBDC. Texas tried to as well. We will need to see how effective these can actually be, but it is encouraging to see this kind of pushback to what is kind of an authoritarian takeover of the financial system. But it does appear that is kind of cooked in the books at this point, but hopefully it can go away, be reversed. People can see that it is a problem and maybe not join in with it. So it is kind of in the hands of people to decide what or whatnot they want to go along with. So all this being said, this is maybe just a long-winded way of saying that it's a continuation of a trend that we've been seeing, and yeah, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about this in the comment section below. Let me know what you think, and I hope to see all of you again at some point.